Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Focused Learning podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and education and strive to answer the big question: how do we prepare students for the future? I'm your host, Kyla Bolden, founder and CEO of WizKid Learning. Each episode, we bring you insightful conversations with educators, industry leaders, and changemakers who are transforming learning environments and equipping students with the skills they need to thrive in the ever evolving world. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Future Focused Learning podcast. In this episode, I am super excited to have Dominique Robinson on. And I've actually known Dominique for about 2 years now because my company, WizKid Learning, does programs with Malvern Family Resource Center, which is a amazing community center in which we have done coding programs with and STEM programs, AI programs. And one of the reasons why I wanted to speak with Dominique is because she is the program director at MFRC, and they have done such an incredible job of implementing innovative, forward thinking, and really engaging programs into their centers. So I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. We talk a lot about the skills that children need in order to succeed in the future, how to create engaging programming, and a little bit more about Dominique's road to actually getting into the youth development space. So, hope you guys like it. And here's the episode. Well, Dominique, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. When we first started thinking about launching Future Focused Learning, I knew I had to have somebody from Malvern Family Services on. And I know we've worked with you for, I think, about like 2 years now. So, I'm super excited to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So before we get into like the meat and the potatoes of the podcast, which is thinking about how do we prepare students for the future, I want to learn a little bit more about you and how you got into the youth development space. Was this something that you always planned on going into? Because I know you've had like you've worked in many positions, whether it was like Boys and Girls Club and now at Malvern. But was this something that you planned to go into, or you kind of fell into it?
I honestly fell into it. I think growing up, I've always had a very nurturing background or like a person, I should say. And for me, I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I'm the youngest of four. And, I was always the one to babysit. And I was always the one that would, want to like bring the kids together and do activities at like family functions or doing all of that. So I always had that sense of nurturing, but it was interesting because I didn't want to like directly work with kids. I always thought I'd do business. So I actually got a diploma in international business and really kind of loved that side of it and understanding and logistical thinking. But I grew up in a Boys and Girls Club. I went there as a kid when we first moved to Regent Park. It was a place for me to feel safe and feel connected to my community because at the time, Regent Park was deemed a very high risk community, and here I was coming in with just my mom and my older siblings, and kind of just feeling like not wanting to go outside, not wanting to make friends, and so forth. And so, Boys and Girls Club really allowed me to kind of feel more connected and make friends in the community. And then from that, I just kept going. I signed up for everything. I did everything. I was super keen. I was a keener and just wanted to get involved and absorb everything. And any opportunity that came up, I was there, whether it was public speaking or like, different programmings, camps, trips, LIT, Leaders in Trainings program. I began volunteering there because I really enjoyed doing it. And then from there, I got my first part-time job. And interesting enough, like I started working there a little bit part-time. But I also dabbled outside and got to experience different commercial places. I worked at the movie theater, and I got promoted to a supervisor by the time I was 16, one of the youngest. And then kind of went back to the Boys and Girls Club and, kind of started to move my rankings up. And interesting enough, I just absorbed. I was just wanting to do everything. I put in the hours. I would only work, like, say, 5 hours a day, but actually work the full 8 hours because I would come in earlier to learn from my supervisors, stay later to learn any workshops, any trainings. I was the first to sign up and they foster that energy. They saw that I picked up on things really quickly. I understood policy. I was creative in the thought process of programming and really loved that space and grew into my role. And yeah, so I think from there, I was also finishing college and finish out my international business. And when I finished, I got to a point where I had to decide, do I leave the Boys and Girls Club or leave the youth children and youth space, and then pursue an in-house business, or what I've been working on for was what at that point was about 5 years. Do I now just stay into it and continue to grow? And I decided to stay into it, and 15 years later, here I am.
That's incredible. And one of the things I love about you is like us also through learning that story, it's very clear that since you grew up in the space, you understand what the students need. It's not really where, you didn't experience boys and girls clubs or these like youth organizations and you're coming in with a pair of like, I don't want to say fresh eyes, but completely new. You experienced it as a child. So I would think that would give you an a understanding of, what some of these students are going through, both positively and negatively, and also how to make them be more engaged.
Yeah, I really have to say that working with having youth staff, young people as my supervisor or as my staff when I was a kid, I I remember idolizing them. I thought they were the coolest. They were so cool. They got to, give us these cool, fun activities. They just made the space so fun. And I just remember vividly too, remembering that memory of like, man, I want to be as cool as them. Like, just be so cool and so good at what they did, you know? And like that, I remember that I was outside in that world. I really just wanted to like be that cool and relate and connect and, really liking that space. And that's something that's always stuck by me of like, whenever working with young people, always ensuring that like, we have that great relationship because relationship is everything, I think. And, that's something that, working in the nonprofit sector that like no matter what position, what role you're in, relationship is everything. And so when you get to have the ability to foster a relationship and watch a child grow into a youth, to a staff, or, and get to see them succeed, it's just such a proud and fulfilling moment, and so it always brings me back to that same feeling of being in that experience of just being like, "Oh, I wonder if," like, I sometimes think back and I'm like, "I wonder if my staff were thinking the same thing as us," and like, wonder what that child will grow up to be or what they will do when they grow up, and I remember years later, connecting with all of them and them not being surprised that I ended up in the space, even though I didn't think I would be there because they were like, oh, it totally made sense that you worked in a nonprofit or you worked in, a rec setting. So, it is definitely a very fulfilling experience, and I have to say it has been not many people get to say they've got a full circle moment in their life to get to do what I've gotten to do, and I'm very humbled by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it gives you a lot more perspective on even your journey as a kid, being able to work in the same types of settings that had so much impact on you. And so I know your role currently is at Malvern Family Resource Center. Could you tell me a little bit more about your current role?
Yeah, so I'm the program director, and I've been in my role now about a year and a half or just over a year or more. And yeah, so as part of my role, I really am helping to supervise all of the teams and the programs that they facilitate and offer across Melbourne Family Resource Center. So we have 8 teams, and I am, under they sit under three kind of departments. And each of those departments have managers, and so I get the honor of kind of getting to work alongside these managers and supporting them as they work with their coordinators and their staff to really developing programming and really ensuring that we always look at delivering high quality programming to the Melbourne community. And they are staff who have had abundance of history, who have lived experience, who grew up in the community, who've been there for so many years. And so I find that my job right now is just really tapping into a lot of those skills and passion that they have to really thinking about creatively how we approach programming and, getting the opportunity to learn a lot more about Melbourne and Scarborough and really getting to see the scope of community. And, I've said since coming to this organization, I've worked with staff who have been from Scarborough and always sense that strong, proud Scarborough feeling. And now being in the community, you can really sense how much everyone just wants to invest in their community, right? That's the premise of community, like putting back into your community, leaving your community stronger than where it started. And it's this idea of like really not wanting to leave the community, not wanting to like move to the city or, quote unquote city, but really looking at like how can we offer the amazing resources, the services, the businesses, everything into this community that we leave it better for the future ahead. And so it it has been really fulfilling and rewarding to get to see that and learn so much and get to work with so much amazing grassroots organizations that serve the Scarborough community. And so, yeah, it's been a great learning experience and getting to really tap into that programming skill set from all different angles, from um, really children all the way up to seniors. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, and we've worked with Malvern for, I want to say, like a year and a half to 2 years now. This would be like our second year that we've worked with you guys. And it's always been a pleasure. One of the really cool things that I noticed about your organization is that you were always open to trying new and innovative programming. And it always seemed like you, as well as I don't know if they're called youth leaders, but like the leaders that are in charge of each age group rather, always made sure to check in with the students and be like, hey, like, is this something that you want to do? And it really seemed like there was a collective effort to make sure you're introducing new programming as well as introducing programming that's actually interesting and relevant to Gen Z, the students that you are actually, doing these programs for. And so I was wondering, what is your approach to implementing programming that actually remains relevant to Gen Z? Because I know there have just been so much changes, even from when we were kids. The things that we found entertaining, sometimes they might not. And they have a lot more distractions than we do. But ultimately, your goal is to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I approach program in this probably very simplest way of like, let's just try it. I love that approach. Like, when I say it, it comes in many different forms. I always try to assess the audience that we're serving. What do they want to try? What are they interested in doing? Do we have the resources? Do we have the ability to do that? Can we start small and build up from there? You know what I mean? I think, um, sometimes when we go in and, we connect all like you mentioned, like, especially with Gen Zs, they've got devices. They've got like, they can go home, they can do all these fun, like computer stuff, and video games and stuff. So it's like, why would they want to like come to us? And it's about like, how are we designing the program to make it fun and approachable, but also kind of getting them back to kind of their roots and the foundation of like, going back to the basics and building their fun and really showing them that they have this creative freedom when they're in the programming and have a say in their programming. And we want to hear how they look at programming and approach programming. And so, that's why with my staff, I really tried to get them to think, what's something you want to try? Let's give it a try. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't always work, and that's okay. And, but at least we gave it a try and, we worked through and we listen. Another approach with that too is I really like to tap into people's passion. And so I always find that when you're passionate about something, you put a level of enthusiasm and um almost like determination into it that the way you approach it, everyone else will feed off of that, right? And so, I used to have, I give this example of like, I remember having this staff who didn't really fit into like the rec space, wasn't into sports or betting group games and that, but also wasn't really into arts and craft. And in that space, and really couldn't find their niche. Like, doing program plan felt like a task and more work. And I remember sitting with him one day and saying, "Okay, tell me about yourself. What do you like to do?" And he was like, "Oh, I like anime and I really like skateboarding." And I was like, "Oh, okay, tell me about anime." And he went on and on. And I was like, "Okay, what?" And he's like, "Wait, I can make an anime group?" And I was like, "If you could come back to me and show me 5 program plans for an hour, what you can do with anime, I will let you run an anime club. Came back with 10. And he was like, "We're gonna do this, and we're showing them drill, and we're showing this," and like you justice. And I was like, "Okay, let get." And I remember him getting like 5 or 6 kids. They were so excited. He was so excited. He brought in, and like Oz automatically right there, it started booming and like becoming this anime club programming. And so I like that. I always try to tap into that approach of like, meeting the needs of the community and what they need, but also the passions that our staff have. They're able to bring that together, and like I said, it really comes back to like, let's give it a try, let's combine it, let's make this nice recipe and see what comes out. And most of the time, it's always successful, and so, other times we have to work through the kinks, but it was a great try. We learned from that experience.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting what you said about how a lot of times when we think of program, maybe think of sports and then we think of arts, like traditional arts, like arts and craft, painting, like those types of things. But there's so much in between there. And I always say to like I talk to this about to my parents all the time. If I didn't do sports, I feel like in like let's say I wasn't into art, what would I be doing after school? What would I feel passionate about? How would I, learn to develop a skill outside of like that purely academic space? And it's always really sad because sometimes there aren't enough programs for all of the really cool niche and important activities in between. And that's one of the things that we love at WizKid because when it comes to STEM programming, when it comes to even like arts, but like more digital arts, because anime, like that's art, but it's just not really considered like traditional what you would learn out of school.
Yeah.
You get to have all these kids come together, feel like they have a space to and that they belong to, and work at something that they feel so passionate about that they wouldn't have been able to do if your organization like yours didn't take a chance on something that might seem a bit more niche than soccer per se, right?
Yeah, and it also means that, like, sometimes it creates a space of, like, also learning. Like, kids that maybe, approaching, like, maybe they would have never got the opportunity to find that they actually love anime or they love something, even right now, we are currently really pushing the envelope of, like, trying to expose, our children and youth to different types of sports and the traditional basketball, soccer, volleyball, and, we're trying this idea of like, let's try cricket. Let's bring that in. I've been like outsourcing curling and like finding like this kids version of curling because like we don't know. Like let's approach it, let's try it, even though we don't know, we'll learn how to do it. Let's give it a try and allow them to kind of make that decision of like, oh, I tried it and I liked it, or I tried it and it's not for me. And at least they can say they tried it. So, it's that idea that like sometimes giving that space to allow children and youth to get to learn and see things that maybe they wouldn't get to do if they didn't get to come to a community hub like ours or in a space like ours because those opportunities didn't present themselves for them.
I think it's so cool to expose them to new things like that. And ultimately, just because of how education has evolved and, every school doesn't have the same resources, it used to be where you got to try a lot of different sports in your
Yeah.
class. And now that's not always the case anymore, right? So it's really great that they're getting that exposure from you. And I also think it's great because it gives students the opportunity to who might not be super athletic or might not think they're super athletic, try a sport and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I kinda like this," or, "Oh, I'm kinda good at this." Everyone can't be good at soccer or I don't know what's it like or track, like,
Yeah.
or basketball, right? Those are like the main sports that you do in elementary school, etcetera. But then you say, "Okay, like, let's try cricket, like, let's try table tennis, let's try curling." And then you're getting these students are like, "Oh, wow, like, I like this," and it's just
Right? Yeah, to try something new, and especially now with the Olympics coming up, it's this idea of like, let's show them all these different sports that are like that you wouldn't deem that, oh, that's a sport. Like, like I think breakdancing is now considered a sport as part of the Olympics. And it's like, look how far like it's come to like now have breakdancing. And so yeah, I exposure is so key. It's so key in youth development and getting them creating opportunities for them to try things and see things and expose themselves is things that, I think as nonprofits and community hubs, like we get the privilege of doing that because we don't maybe have quote unquote the restrictions that school do, or oh, we don't have the staffing and stuff, and we really get to tap into those spaces. And that's why I always try to say that, like, when we think about the work and the impact we're going to have on young people, it's those things that they learn outside the scope of school, those life skills, those social skills, those opportunities to try things. They're going to go in life and say, I got the opportunity. I learned STEM because I got an opportunity to come to an after school program and take the 8-week class and get to learn that, which is something they wouldn't have got the opportunity to do in school. And now I really want to get into engineering, or now I really want to explore the STEM field and do that as a career. So that sometimes it's nice to, through all the hurdles and about, things that come with working in nonprofit. Those are the exciting parts, those are the way that we're impacting and having a role in young people's lives.
And one of the things I love the most about, my role, like working in the education space, and I would think it's the same for you in the nonprofit space, is that you have the opportunity to work with students from many different backgrounds. Yes, Malvern might be centered in like one specific location, but you get to see students from all walks of life, from many different types of backgrounds. And I think something that we always try to answer, and we definitely try to answer this on this podcast, is like, how are we preparing students for the future? And with that comes with the question of what skills are maybe not being adequately prepared in traditional education settings that we could focus on. So, what are some skills that you see that are not adequately developed in schools that are essential for youth's future?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like there's such a wide range. Like, when we talk about, like, for example, financial skills or financial literacy, I think we approach it in very like how school approaches it in like a very mathematic way. Like, I will be completely honest. Like, I am lucky that I can do math without a calculator. And I can't say that's the same for many of our generations right now. But I think it's this idea of like, I still can't even grasp the understanding of like a mortgage. You know what I mean? Like, those are something that I had to take it upon myself to learn and understand and do workshops. Or I remember leaving high school and going to post secondary, and within my first 2 weeks being, oh, you should sign up for a credit card. Get a credit card, get a credit card. And not even in the world knowing like what interest rate mean, what is the responsibility of a credit card, what does that mean, and so why I say all this is like that idea of like really teaching them the financial responsibilities that come when you're an adult, right? I think, and even for some young people, they're doing a lot to contribute to their household, right? And that responsibility gets put on them, but kind of understanding that scope to kind of have a better understanding of one, what your parents and what they had put towards taking care of you and the household and your family and so forth, but also what it means of like when it means like you become an adult, right? Like this idea, like we're still becoming, like I'm still an adult, or I say to my friends, we're still adulting. We did an adulting thing there. Paid a bill, that's adulting. But like, so for young people, I think it's really kind of understanding those pieces of like, what are the foundation, those skills that they really need to understand to prepare them for life. And I think that sometimes that gets missed in the school. Like, school is taught in a very traditional, very long term, some person decided this is the way how school needs to be taught in education. But I always am thinking to challenge that. And I think even coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing how like online school and how like some kids excelled in online school because being in that space where they can focus and do that was way better for them than being in a classroom, and vice versa. For some, needing to be stimulated, being in a classroom, being around others was just better than being on a screen. And but that, to show you that we have to start to look at unconventional ways of learning and approach that and take learning away and make it in a very teaching young people how to be creative, being innovative, how they approach things, because those are things that we need to start to give them those foundation and those skills that's really going to prepare them for life, if that makes sense. Like, we see it all the time, or I see it sometimes when I get placement students, is that they come in and they're super smart. They've learned, they study, they understand, like, I know what it means or child development. And then they deal with a young person or a child that has a tantrum or breaks out. And it's like, they're doing everything that the book taught them, but not realizing that skill of sometimes it's just like, "Hey, are you okay? Do you wanna go for a walk? Do you wanna chat? You want like, they just wanna be heard," you know what I mean? And so, I think sometimes those are I always think, like, those are the skills that we need to start to instill, bring back those kind of traditional, like, not like the traditional, like, home ec or like, um, what is it, like cooking or parenting class and stuff, but like, teaching different practical skills that allow young person to understand the different ways that it can approach life and think about, and also how they approach post-secondary, right? Like, I think conflict resolution is one too, because it is inevitable that you're going to deal with conflict, however that looks in life, whether that's disagreement with your colleague or your supervisor. And so, how do you do that? How do you resolve that situation? How do you communicate your feelings without coming off or being demeaning or being disrespectful? How do you get your feelings across? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you advocate that if your needs are not being met, whether that's in post secondary and you're supposed to have, accommodations and the school is like not doing that for you? Like, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you're able to get your needs met because it's your right? And so I think sometimes that's where you experience that. Like, I remember talking to one of the teachers in the high school when I first started, and I went over and I was like, "What has been the side effect you've seen since students came back from the pandemic?" And she said their confidence. They don't want to public speak. They would rather fail than have to stand up in front of a class to speak. And speaking, don't get me wrong, public speaking is not my word. Like, I get nervous. I completely like, oh my god. But the fact of the matter is, they're so terrified and so anxious that, like, the thought of having to speak in front of their peers and they can't hide behind a screen or a camera and having to communicate and stuff, they're so worried that they would rather shut down. But the reality is, in life, you're going to have to do that in some way. No matter what job you do, you have to have some sense of communication. And so it was interesting to that scope of like kind of bringing back those foundational pieces that everyone needs in life, no matter what field, no matter what you do in life, those basic skills that we all need to kind of get through life.
Those human skills, right? Like you
Yeah.
talk about how quickly technology is moving, and it definitely is moving super quickly. But I think more than ever, those human qualities are becoming so much more important. I was speaking to a teacher, and she was talking about how some students would just chat GPT their whole presentation, right? And but then they'll get up in front of the class and they can't really talk about it. They can't really answer questions about it, right? And so the ability to communicate your thoughts, the ability to actually talk about what you've learned and advocate for yourself and answer questions about your opinions is going to be super, super important, and is super important. It's always been important, but especially now,
Yeah.
to just even show your understanding of a subject. When I was in high school, I was very lucky enough to go to a school that they did this thing called the Harkness method of teaching. And basically, all your classes were done around a boardroom table. It's like a Harkness table.
Oh,
It looks like a
wow.
dining room table,
Mm.
even math class. So even in like the non-humanities classes, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of opposing points of view. And if you didn't agree with your classmate, you could say, you know what, I don't agree with that point because of X, Y, and Z, or I agree with this part, but have you thought about this? Or somebody might say something and you might be like, why do you feel that way? Or why did you decide to do this and that? And it got you very comfortable with, conflict. And I think that's a skill you brought up, but it's a skill that students definitely need to be more comfortable with,
Yeah.
especially as they go into the workforce. And I think definitely because of the pandemic, the move to a lot of people working from home and then back to office. And then because of the pandemic, a lot of students were not socializing in the way that they would
Mhm.
normally socialize. Little conflicts become such a big point of anxiety,
Oh my
right? For
goodness, it
them.
mounts it. It mounts up on them, right?
Yes.
They can't if they get a remote criticism or feedback, instantly shut down, or it's like it feels like they've imploded, and it's like, "Oh, no," like,
Yes.
to learn how to take criticism. We have to learn how to navigate. And it's never a good feeling. No one ever wants to give someone bad news or criticism or sometimes if they didn't mean to intentionally, but how do you not make it feel like your whole world has just imploded?
Yeah, one of the things that we do in with Kit Learning, so you know how we teach K through 12 classes, and then we also have WKL Academy, which is teen and young adults workforce development programming. And one of the things that we really try to teach is like you should be coachable, right? And so when you're in a job, you are developing, and if your boss or your superior had never had something like some type of criticism for you, that sometimes means you're not growing because you want your boss to be able to give you criticism, feedback, so you could grow and that you could be even more of a value to that organization. And I think those career, I would say, or workforce etiquette, that conflict resolution, that being comfortable with taking criticism, the ability to advocate for yourself are so many like they're really important skills that need to be instilled in students. So
Yeah.
in your opinion, is this something that, like, how do you think this could be addressed, whether it's in like the schools or after school, school format? How do we fix these problems that these students are having?
I think it's really kind of we need unconventional teachers to really to challenge the system, and we need spaces like MFRC and community hubs that really see that identify those gaps and fill them in as best as possible, right? And why I say so to go back, sorry about the unconventional teachers is like we need teachers that just because you get this book and this is your curriculum, how are you connecting with your young people? It goes back to relationship, right? Like young people thrive on like solid, good foundation relationship. And I think everyone can always think about that one teacher that made that impact, that listened to them, that, quote unquote was being cool or like did the way they approached things were so cool or that staff, right? The way that staff, why I kept going back to that community center, or to the hub because that staff, I like that staff. They talked to me, they listened to me, they communicated. And so they took the time to understand. But it's as young people, they probably don't even realize that like that teacher and that staff is really building skills into you, like, without they're just approaching that learning in a different way, right? Like how we talk about you, how we teach that communication, maybe in the school setting too. It's like, I use my accounting teacher, for example. I remember in grade 10, and no one wanted to take accounting in grade 10, whoever wanted to do that. And he was that type of teacher that came in. He literally came in with like his newspaper, like, he didn't even never wanna be here, and yet his class was always filled. Like, no one ever missed his class. He didn't care if you did. He didn't show up, whatever. But because he would talk to us, like, so nonchalant, it was like, "Why are you even a teacher, sir?" We used to always say. But everything out of that class I took away, I have applied in life. He taught me how to do my tax. He taught us how to do our taxes. And back then, it was a paper. So I know for shopper Denver's are
No TurboTax.
yeah. No triple tax. But I used to know how to do it for like years. I did my taxes by hand. He taught us about like, would tell us like these little philosophy tips. And it's so funny. I remember him saying like, you all are working or going to start working. If you save 10% of your paycheck by the time you're about 40, you'll be a millionaire. And when I think about like, that's like 20 years ago now. And it's like, I always would laugh about it, but I'm curious, like, I always think back, like, how many of us actually listened to it? Because it was practical, like, like, it was made sense. It was like, he wasn't, like, BSing us. He wasn't, like, he was just telling us, like, the real world is tough. It's tough. You kind of need to know, these are the things you need to know. I'm not going to teach you irrelevant stuff. And so I think the fact that how he approached learning and that way of kind of going against the book and going against the system, one made students more wanting to learn from him, more attracted, like wanting to like, be in his classroom and learn from it. But two, if you weren't listening or you didn't apply like any of that schoolwork, you took away at least of those nuggets. Like you left with to this day, 20 years later, there's still things I take away that I still remember out of that conversation. Right. And so I think, to go back to your question, it's really how we continue to push the system and or push the status quo and really take it upon ourselves to really, it's a domino effect. The more if we all just kind of we need that one person that really pushed that system and hopefully we all kind of go along, kind of see it too and approach our learning different and really meet the youth and them where they're at. Because honestly, we're really wanting to invest in our future and invest in our young people. We need to start listening to them. We need to start looking at them. We need to start seeing them. We need to remember what it was like to be them. And honestly, how overstimulated they are right now. Like, I didn't grow up. I think you didn't grow up with social media. We came at a time with social media and the internet and everything was coming about. So we kind of have that privilege of kind of knowing what it's like to not have it and survive without it. And now I read a statistic where it was like the millennials are the last generation to ever not have technology. And so now when we think about every generation after us will have it. So I feel like now they have twice as more pressure, stimulate, like, talks and everything coming at them, telling them or challenging their thoughts and approach. And so, we really have to show them and remind them that, like, you can't survive without this. You can make it in the world. Anything is possible. You know what I mean? And how to look at
Yeah.
life.
Just encouraging them, and I think also giving teachers the agency to run classes like that. I feel a lot of times there's so many incredible teachers out there, but they're under-resourced and they're forced to teach like 14 different subjects and all of this, which makes it very hard to do something like what your accounting teacher did and, instill those values and then that are long lasting. And I also heard you talk a little bit about giving students like agency over what they're learning in order to make sure that what you're teaching them is relevant to them, right? And that they have like some skin in the game. And I was thinking about, Malvern runs such incredible programming. And you work with students from a big, diverse background. And like you said, you have students that are interested in anime, while others are interested in sports, and others are interested in art, and some are interested in all of them, right? But what do you think are some of the key elements of a successful youth program that like holistically addresses the students' need, especially like considering the diverse background students are coming from, and then the intersectionalities when it comes to race, gender, where people live, all of those things.
I think some of the key successes, I think, is being approachable and creating a safe space where a young person can really be themselves. And what that looks like is, having a caring adult or, in that space that honestly listens, is, provides a level of mentorship. Mentorship is huge, right? And that like kind of builds on the foundation of relationships. And I think a lot of people can, you look at sometimes, you know, successful leaders or people in the world and you hear like who their mentor was, right? Or the person that helped them get over maybe a tough time in their life or a hurdle or believed in them or encouraged them. Or was it someone that listened, And so I think though, that with that safe space and allowing them to be themselves and create and be creative and express and try new things, but also being there for them when they fail or things don't go right or celebrating their wins, that really kind of makes it's a safety net that is built around a young person. My approach to my programming when I talk to my staff is I talk about this idea of a village and bringing that mentality back. Like if you think about historical and our ancestors and, everything surrounded being from a village and people as a village, no matter if you were related or not, we worked together. We built this village. We supported one another. We lifted people up. We didn't tear people down. And wanting to bring that philosophy back to that bring that into our programming, and how I say that is how we look at collaboration, collaborating with other organizations, bringing different organizations to our space to show young people that, like, look at all these wonderful different organizations and agencies and people that are out there. Like, we don't have to be the be all and end all. And to me, I always say, I just want our young people in the community we work with to feel like they're wrapped around a warm hug And that means we as organizations and agencies are working together to create a space in a community where they feel safe. And if their needs are not being met by us, then they're going somewhere else that is trusted, that we're like, okay, you're good. You're innocent. You're doing good. You feel safe. You're getting your needs met. And, you're thriving in that. And so if we kind of consistently build that and they feel safe and they feel comfortable and they feel like, that there's possibilities, like we're going to see our young people just bloom and become successful. I'm not saying they don't now, but I think continuing to bring them back to that idea of like, no, let's not tear one another down, but build each other up, because we're stronger together than we are apart. And so that can just speak such volumes and just have such a ripple effect, right? Like that idea of such a ripple effect to maybe reducing the feel of anxiety, how they approach situations in life, the communication, how you know what I mean? Like, can you imagine like what the world would look like if we kind of just all kind of, really try to even it out and really support. Yeah, it's this idea of like, yeah, this foundation piece and going back to know that like you got people around you that want to see you succeed, want to see you successful, want to support you, will be there for you even if it doesn't go well or you fall. And just to, I think when I talk about it now, and if I think about that, having that, I had that growing up, and that just made it sometimes so much easier to breathe. If
What
that
you
makes
spoke about, absolutely, and what you spoke about is super important because I think what you're saying is creating a safe space, but also be surrounded by people who are encouraging you, want to see you win, and expect to see you win in life too. Like have great expectations for you. And they also talk about how in the classroom, teachers that believe their students are going to be successful, believe their students are going to do well, the class does better. Like parents who believe that their students are the rather their kids are good kids, have good kids most of the time. They
yeah.
talk about how I was watching this video. It was like a psychologist who works with parents, and they were talking about how parents who have like let's say preteens, and then somebody is like, "Oh, wait till they get to their teenage years, they're gonna give me trouble." The parents that say that are more likely to have student parents, I mean, children who actually do give them trouble when they
Mm.
when they are teenagers. And I have a friend whose mom would always say, I would just always be like, yeah, like my kids are good, they give me no problems, and I always instilled that into them. And they gave her no problems, and part of that was because she just said that. She
Yeah.
she really expected that of them. And I think so often because of so many reasons, everyone doesn't always have that at home, right? So to come to a
Yeah.
center and know that they are loved, know that like they have a community supporting them that wants the best for them is something that's so invaluable. And I love that you're making that like kind of like a cornerstone of how you approach programming for what you do. And then kind of looking at like the a big picture, and then also one of the big questions that we like to ask on this podcast is okay, so like how do we prepare students for the future, and what is that like skill that students need to really focus on? And we talked about like communication, conflict resolution, but if you had to pick one, and this is kind of a funny question because you can't pick one skill. We can't just be like extra expert communicators and you can't problem solve, right? But like just for fun, if you had to pick one skill that you think is the most important for students to develop, and that can be cultivated at a young age, like something that like you could start cultivating at 7 years old per se, what would that skill be? It could be something like confidence, resilience, critical thinking.
Oh my
There's really no
goodness.
wrong answer.
I know, to choose one and that like, mm, I say it not to sound cliche, but I think, and I feel like hopefully we get to a world where we stop saying post-pandemic. It's been 4 years, but still it lingers. But coming out of that, I said with kids, And I think what I say with kids, and I think we don't give kids enough credit sometimes.
Mhm.
And because I see this, it's a ripple effect to youth, but it's this idea of resilience. They're so much stronger than we give them credit for. I think sometimes this idea that we think that they're too young to understand things, and there are maybe topics that at their young brain, we don't want them to worry about or stress about because they're young, right? We want them to have a childhood and feel carefree as long as they want. But I also think that sometimes we think that not exposing them to different learnings and styles and for example, like workshops where they'll be like, oh, they're too young, they won't grasp it, or they won't do this. And it's like, we don't give them enough credit. We think that sometimes they're not strong enough, to heal after, traumatic situations or to go through a 4-year pandemic where your whole world flips upside down. And so I think resilience, to continue to foster that and to build that into young people and to show them, as a child that like, yes, this tough thing may have happened to you. This may be hard, that know that life can get better. You have the ability to change the direction of your life. And, I do know that generational trauma is a factor. It is a thing, your circumstances and what that may be. But I also think it's a powerful, like you said, of that repetition and those words to know that like it is possible for that to change. And it may mean that you need support, like coming to like MFRC, and coming to programming and, having a mentor or, surround people and that village and foundation around you will help kind of hopefully change, but you have control to be able to change the path and what that path may look like. And it may change multiple times and that's okay. But yeah, I've been that was something that I thought coming out when I was, like, astonished when I have friends who are teachers and just to I remember asking them when school started back for the first time and just to hear how kids just, like, jumped at there were kids that still kind of had to adjust with that and social anxieties and those pieces, but just to see that kids picked up, like, things like, right where they left off, like, they just picked up, right? And so they survived something that was super scary and super like, they went through a lot, and I think now, hopefully, they feel that they're like, "Wow, if I could survive that, I can probably get through anything."
Resilience and adaptability, you could like put those two in the same part, is super important. And you're right. Kids are so resilient. I, in a lot of ways, think they're even more resilient than many adults, right?
Yeah.
And they're also sponges that can learn so much, and we shouldn't put limits on it. And I agree what you said about, yes, the pandemic was very hard. It was very traumatic for everyone, but we still have a lot of life to live, right? So we want to teach students that you were resilient. This was incredible that you made it through this very difficult time. And like, let's take the skills that we learned from having to be so resilient as of like the whole earth really had to be so
Yeah.
resilient. And let's make sure that we're applying that resilience in other places. So we talk about like educational tenacity, the ability to try again, and adaptability, the ability to be like, okay, I was on this path, but this has changed. Let
Yeah.
me move into another path. Those are skills that are so important. And I think as the world changes and because tech is moving so fast, the workforce changes are moving so fast. Like that resilient is going to have to be like a cornerstone of like a healthy human being. So, I absolutely agree. And the last question I have for you, because we've talked about so much here, it's been quite fun. And it's really cool to see your perspective when it comes to youth focused programming, especially from somebody who has actually experienced those rec centers and the like the boys and girls clubs as a child and has grown up and like worked their way through and up to actually lead and be like a program director. How do you think youth development programs need to evolve to better prepare young people for how rapidly changing the world is and how quickly technology is moving and the social landscape is moving? How do you think recreational programs like you guys or other rec centers need to evolve in order to keep up with that and adequately prepare students for the future?
Yeah, like, I think it's the way we think of programming in a very innovative way too. We try to, think about the needs of the young person, kind of what they're experiencing right now, what they're, what are the trends, what are the things that they're into, and also what are the gaps, right? That are maybe that are not being addressed. And so, from technology, like we know young people are going to have phones. We know they're going to be on social media. We know like that's inevitable. So now it's up to us to really teach them how to do it safely.
Mhm.
And so that's where those digital literacy programs are super key for that. If you're going to be online, how do you understand what's online? How do you understand scams? How do if you're going to use AI, how do you use it properly? So it's not a kind of base, because it's meant to be an aid and not a crutch, right? And
Mm.
so, so it's about like meeting them where they're at. And, sometimes a lot of the times too, it's taking the platforms that they love, like TikTok or social media, and showing them how those platforms, if used in the right way, can have such a positive impact and such a positive change. And, a lot of the times, I'll be on social media, and a lot of the people I see are like these great TED Talks or leaders and discussions and videos or stuff that bring these positive feelings to me, and not make me kind of grow up and think, oh, those are possible. Or, I saw something really fun, or news articles and things like that. So, kind of approaching that aspect too. I think also too, realizing that mental health is so critical, and that we are now in a position in the world where we're talking about it a lot more. There's a lot more resources out there. There's a lot more abilities of how we approach mental health. And as a staff team recently, we have we're privileged enough to have two in-house counselors at MFRC that work with youth and their families, with whether it's mental health or substance addiction. And, we've had the opportunity for them to train us. And it was interesting. One of them had said, mental health tends to have this, so I hear what he's quotes, but mental health tends to have this very negative, you hear it, it's a negative thing. It's depression, it's bipolar, it's schizophrenic. And, it feels like this very heaviness. But the reality is we all have a form of mental health. Stress
Yeah.
in itself is a mental health. And it's a matter of like at what degree or heighten it is. And so, changing that language to start to say mental well-being. How do we take care of our mental well-being a bit more? How do we be able to say it's okay to you know, have low days? It's okay to, go through different waves of emotion and experience that. And so how do we support young people in those spaces? And how do we create programming that doesn't have this notion of it's a mental health programming, but how are we continuously weaving mental well-being throughout our programming? Whether, that's a grounding exercise when we start programming, check-ins, you know, um, as simple as having food in our programming whenever they come, because sometimes, a lot of the times, young people are maybe experiencing different emotions and feelings because they haven't eaten all day. You know what I mean? So it's those different approaches of, mental well-being, having resources there, having someone that's going to listen, connect them to the right services that they may need, programming to tap into their passions, sometimes even providing space to a study group if they need space to study for a big exam, or giving them the tips and tools, or being able to blow off steam and, play an active game. So it gets the dopamine in them. And so, it makes their anxiety go down. So, we're really thinking of different creative ways of approaching um, those mental health and well-being programmings, and really instilling that throughout our programming. So it's almost like a web. So it feels like a very
Yeah.
natural dialogue conversation, and that young people feel a lot more safe to come and get the support that they need.
Yeah, and I love what you said about calling it mental well-being rather than mental health. And I think it's really the foundation of any good program and any, you know, thing you want to do in life. Your mental well-being has a lot to do with it. Even look at sports, there's a reason why athletes have to go to like sports psychologists, and a bunch of what they do is like mental health exercises, because if your mental is not there, it makes it so much harder to do a lot of other things across the board, right? And actually take care of yourself. So I really think like mental well-being needs to be woven into education, sports, recreation, like every single part, because at the end of the day, that's the cornerstone of, basically anything that we try to do. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's just things that are just so natural that Interesting enough, one of in our children's program throughout the school year, they were piloting meditation. And it was something very interesting because people are like meditation with kids, but it's just that art of kids just sitting for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And but some of them, like, it's a not for time, but just that even as adults, some of us can't be in our own still. We can't be in our own quiet. And so it goes back to that, but like, that idea with if we start to teach young people or young children how to like just sit and be in there still and be comfortable with that feeling, then it will be something that will just consistently and it just you do it and that was it. And then we went back to programming and it was like, oh, that wasn't hard. Okay,
Yeah.
right. It's not like this whole like you were meeting them where they're at and what they are able to do. And for some adults they can do an hour. For kids, most of the time they can do 2 to 5 minutes. And
Yes.
hey, they did it. Okay.
Most adults can only do 2 to 5 minutes. So, yeah, I love that. And giving them the tools to quiet themselves and ground themselves in such a hectic world that we all live in is so important. So, yeah, Dominique, it was so nice to speak with you. I feel like I learned so much. I hope our listeners did too. I think one of the cool things that you do, what Malvern does, is really take a holistic approach when they're looking at programming. So, and I think that's something that could just be implemented across the board, whether it's a sports program, arts program, or in the classroom, really looking at the whole child and being like, okay, how do we develop this whole person? So thank you for all that you did. And it's so great to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And the work that you're doing at WizKid is just awesome. We just loved working with you, and I loved getting to know you. And just you are just so amazing, and you're so passionate about what you do. And I continue to learn so much whenever I get to talk to you. So this has just been so awesome.
Thank you so much. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I certainly did. MFRC has always been such an incredible organization to work with, and I was super happy that you guys got to hear and learn a little bit more about them today. Please make sure to subscribe to this podcast, give it 5 stars, share it with a friend. I'm so thankful for all of you guys listening, and I hope you have a great day.